We're still having trouble? All right, I'll try to speak up. Before I introduce our special guest today, I just would like to announce our next session will be December 16th. We will have Macon Delrahim, the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, will be speaking here at Hudson, details to follow. Today, we're very honored to have with us Professor Anne Coughlan from Northwestern University's Kellogg Business School. For those of you who don't know, Kellogg is one of the preeminent business schools in the country and is always the top-ranked marketing department, not just in the United States, but in the world. And we're very pleased to have today one of the chaired faculty members from the marketing department. Anne Coughlan is the Polk Brothers chair at Northwestern University. She'll be speaking to us about different business models and the importance of allowing them to flourish and not be impeded. And she will speak about a new paper she's just written that's available on SSRN, and after the talk you can get the exact link. It may actually be up there.
Well, I'll click on it or get it for everybody.
She'll speak for roughly half an hour, then I may ask a couple of questions as the moderator, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So with that, I should also mention that when I started at Stanford Economics Department, the PhD program, Anne was a little bit ahead of me, and she gave a very wonderful talk to the first year students in the orientation program. She wouldn't remember me as one of the little newbies there, but I certainly remember Anne very, very fondly from that. So with that.
Great. Well, thank you, Harold, for that great introduction. And also for inviting me to come and present here at the Hudson Institute. I'm very pleased to be able to do that today. And to share with you, should I turn this off? I have a feeling I have a microphone near a microphone. How about that? Is that going to be better? Yes? Okay, good. And to share with you some research that I have actually been thinking about for years. And it has morphed and grown. You will see today's version. I have developed many, many alternatives of this work, and the results that I've derived are very robust, so I'm pretty confident about the nature of the findings I'm going to talk to you about. And also to think about the policy importance of what I am saying and doing here, okay? So I've entitled this talk, Assessing Participant Harm from Voluntary Business Arrangements. That's a major title. My main application as an economic analyst is going to be direct selling, also sometimes called multi-level marketing or MLM. You may be familiar with any one of those terms. But although my model is about that, really the guts of the findings are completely robust to all the different kinds of VBAs that I'm going to talk to you about, which you are going to resonate with, okay? All right, so I put all the clickers in my pocket. I'm not normally a clicker person, so you'll probably get to see me mess this up. So our agenda today is to talk about what a VBA is, a voluntary business arrangement, and why I call this a channel. My expertise is in economics, as Harold said, and specifically inside the marketing department, I think about how firms go to market, which is called distribution channel analysis, creation, measurement, incentivization, and all kinds of other subtopics. And so these voluntary business applications, arrangements, are all parts of a particular kind of go-to-market strategy. And they have particular common institutions and parameters that I find super interesting, which are not the same as some of our non-VBA standard economy sorts of route-to-market arrangements, okay? Then I'll introduce why it is I find this so interesting, because there is concern voiced in various circles about harm to participants. And I'll give you a few examples of this. And then I'll jump into really my major topic here, multi-level marketing as such a channel. What is it? Some of you may or may not be familiar with it, so I'll give you a couple of high-line comments about what it is so you have an idea how it works on the inside. And then jump to a discussion of harm. Harm here to someone who signs up as what is called a distributor. I'll introduce some terms that are really important, I think, to truly understanding what I'm going to define as true harm. I think the term harm is used very commonly because it is a term in common parlance. And I want to get a little more precise about that, as you will see. And then give you a sketch, really, I've got a whole paper about this, of my economic model and results, and then implications for policy. Okay, so what is a voluntary business arrangement channel? Uber, Lyft, right, all these ride-sharing arrangements. eBay, you can be an eBay seller. I discovered this. My husband decided to become an eBay seller this fall. Unbelievable. I wouldn't have the time to pursue this interesting hobby, but he does. And so you can do that. You can become a retailer on eBay. You can become a third-party reseller on Amazon. Etsy, the big arts and crafts website, is also a place for voluntary business arrangements, people to engage in becoming a retailer, as well as being a direct seller or an MLM distributor. What do these things share? First of all, the participant, the individual who does this thing, is an independent contractor. They're not an employee. They do not have the protections of an employee. And so you may have read about and heard the casual term gig economy, this rise of the gig economy. The thing I didn't add in here, but which is a huge gig economy policy concern thing that I see being in a university, is adjunct professorships, right? So any of you, I saw one or two heads nod. This is a serious issue in academia because we now have an enormous number of people who are not employees of the university who teach, on a gig basis, 1 or 2 or 6 or 8 classes a year. And if you're interested in that, I can talk about that offline. It's another very interesting application. Now, what does it mean that you are an independent contractor? As a non-employee, the platform, the entity that we associate with this VBA, cannot tell you what hours to work, what product or products to focus on selling, how much you should invest in training, what times of the year you work, what times of the day or night or weekend you work. They can't tell you any of that. You are an entrepreneur yourself, okay? There is always an agreement between the participant and the provider. And that is a contract. I think some people don't quite think seriously about this. This is a business contract. Your signature, electronic or in ink, as a participant, binds you to the contractual arrangements, just as your signature on a mortgage document binds you to the mortgage. Now, many of us don't read the 80 or 90 pages of our mortgage refinancing documents. I do, but I think I'm rare. And similarly, some people do or don't read these agreements, but they are bound by contract. And they provide, they define what everybody's responsible for, what their rights are, what investments may, can, and must be made. And the other really interesting thing here, which is going to be important for me, is that almost all who wish to participate are welcome. I just put almost in here because of the principle of never say never and never say always, But for example, in direct selling, I've looked at lots and lots of companies, and the typical constraint is you have to be 18 years old. If you're 16, you have to get your parents' permission. And one company once I came across, they said, you may not become a distributor if you are a convicted felon. That's it. That's it. So really, it's very open. I think there are some more criteria that are sometimes urged or followed by, say, an Uber. Not much at the beginning, more now. And I will tell you, because I'm interested in these things, I have actually decided to be a participant observer, right? And so I have actually started an Etsy shop, a complete, I'm telling you, flop. Okay, sort of because I have a day job, right? And I will tell you, the requirements are nada, okay? So this is what this thing is. It is a platform made by a company that allows individuals to pursue entrepreneurial businesses, okay? That's what I mean by a VBA, and there are lots of them out there. Now, like any other entrepreneurial opportunity, the outcomes you get from participating in this are uncertain. So if you are a provider, the firm, an Etsy, an Uber, a multi-level marketing firm, you don't know each participant's capabilities, what we as economists call your type. And you'll see in what I do in my model, I use a very familiar trope in economic modeling, which is to talk about highs and lows. But you could have a continuum of types. And so the point is that the firm, Etsy, has no idea who I am at some level. They could go find out a lot about me, but they don't, right? They don't know whether I'm skilled at running an arts and crafts site or not. They don't know how much time I devote to it. They don't know whether I'm a good photographer. They don't know how much I'm willing to spend on ad spending. There's all kinds of things they have no idea about me. And so the provider really doesn't know beforehand who you are. The really interesting thing, and this as an economist, we call models of sort of two-sided, not full information. Fascinatingly, the participants don't know either, right? So I think in this world, we sort of assume that people know themselves. Who would know me better than me, right? But in fact, the participant doesn't know whether they themselves are a great seller or not if they enter a direct selling company, because you can do it without ever having tried before, right? And they don't know how much time they're really going to be willing to devote to this. They may have a plan, it may or may not come to fruition, okay? So there's uncertainty on both sides. Furthermore, and I should say therefore, the provider typically makes no guarantee of return. So this is not like getting a job as a sales rep at Merck Pharmaceuticals, where you have a salary. It is understood, right? You will, right? No guarantees at all. You could make nothing. Furthermore, the kinds of things that make you happy about this may be monetary, pecuniary, or not. So there are ways in which you make money at these gigs, right? So some of these are accrued directly from the provider. The ride fares you get as an Uber driver. There may be some bonuses or upcharges you get, for example, driving on the weekends. Some are not provided by the provider, like sometimes people will give you cash tips, okay? Similarly, in direct selling, there's compensation from the firm, which can be earned, but very importantly, a bunch of the economic returns are not even seen by the firm. So everything that you buy at wholesale and sell at retail, that margin you get to just keep. That's cash you keep. The firm typically, there are now a few exceptions to this, but typically does not even see that. So they don't know how much you're making financially out of that, or how much you're enjoying consuming yourself at a discount because you get to buy it wholesale, okay? Beyond that, there are these non-pecuniary benefits, which are actually highly prized. Job flexibility, social interaction, sort of the I'll say, pleasure of wholesale discounts, getting a deal, and so on. So particularly things like these, flexibility and social interaction, are not immediately financially measurable, and therefore they tend to be ignored. And I'll just refer to this if someone thinks, I'm so excited, let me know, I'll send you the paper. I have a colleague, he's a marketing professor at UCLA. His name is Peter Rossi, a very, very, very super econometrician. Sits in the marketing department. And he and some other co-authors recently did a very interesting paper on Uber drivers, okay? Now, in direct selling, the stuff I'll talk to you about, we don't have the database they have with Uber drivers, so we can't like port that technique over. However, here's what's important. They actually measured utility models from which they could infer the value of flexibility. That's kind of cool, right? So you can, in some cases, with the appropriate data, get a monetary measure, right, of some of these utility elements. So I say this as a transformed former pure economist who thought this was all baloney. But I really do believe this matters to people. I've seen it in all these different environments. I love the flexibility. I'm a stay-at-home fill-in-the-blank. I live in a rural area. I have no opportunities to, go out and get a job in a big city. What am I going to do? So the flexibility matters, right? Okay. But the outcome of all of this is there is uncertainty so you do your research. Am I going to do this? And the moment comes where you're going to sign up and do it. At that moment, even when you are diligent, which some people are not, that's their own fault. But even if you are diligent, there will still be uncertainty. You don't know, right? Okay. So this is a classic entrepreneurial venture. As an entrepreneur, you should take this on, understanding that there is risk and uncertainty that is partly due to your own personal nature, but also due to your own purposeful choices, as well as to the outside environment and competition, et cetera, okay? So that's important to recognize. All of that uncertainty roils around, and the upshot of this is that across many of these kinds of VBAs, there's great policy concern. And I'm using policy broadly here, FTC oversight, complaints to the Better Business Bureau, et cetera, lawsuits and class action suits and so on. People are concerned about the observation ex post of what I'm generally calling negative outcomes, not great outcomes to the participants. This is such a travesty, okay? And so some of the things that they refer to, this is not a whole list, but it gives you, I think, a nice start here, is they say, nobody told them that their a priori, at the beginning of time, beliefs about themselves, like how good they would be at doing this thing, are incorrect. No one told them. No one told them, no one told me that my crafts are what my mother used to call made by the loving hands at home. I don't know if that's a phrase that's familiar to you. I came to understand that meant not ready for prime time, right? Okay. So nobody tells me about that. I've been shafted, okay? Or people say, these are all and/ors. I had to sink so much money into this. I can't recover it. I've been had. And/or the possibility of simply being misled by someone who guides me, be it the platform itself or someone who is my mentor or recruiter into that opportunity. Okay? So any or all of those things could actually occur, okay? And could produce negative outcomes. However, one of my thesis statements here is going to be, just because you walked away with less cash than you started with does not mean you have been, in the legal sense, harmed. Okay? Any more than if you started a restaurant in town and it folded after a year, you're harmed. Well, it's true you're not as wealthy as you were before, but harm implies you can blame somebody, and that's what I want to kind of tease apart here, okay? All right. So now, using those ideas, let's go into the direct selling world. Again, a little bit of an overview here. In this case, provider and participant are the MLM firm, so like a Mary Kay, an Amway, an Arbonne sells makeup, et cetera. There's hundreds of these. The firm, and participants are these people who sign up, individuals, and they are frequently called distributor, lots of other names. I'll call them a distributor. Sometimes they're called associate or consultant or something like that. The MLM company rewards, that is, provides financial rewards in various ways for the successful exertion of sales effort that produces sales, okay, as well as giving an opportunity to a distributor to go out there and just be an entrepreneurial direct retailer and make wholesale to retail markups themselves. Most of the firms have some sort of list of suggested retail prices. They are usually somewhere on the order of, lots of variations, somewhere on the order of twice the wholesale price, right? So there's typically some money to be had if you can price at the suggested retail price, although it's up to you to decide how to price. You could discount if you wish. Okay, this is not some kind of weird little thing. It is a long-standing channel of retail distribution. It's been around for 100 plus years, Kimberly? 100 plus, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, 2019. Oh, yeah, more than 100 years. More than 100 years. Not quite in the form it is today, but similar. So it's been around a long time. In the United States, retail sales in 2018 were estimated at $35 billion. Globally, almost $200 billion in retail sales, made by 6.2 million business-focused distributors in the US, and another 36.6 million who join, but mainly for personal consumption and maybe some retailing. And globally, almost 120 million people. So this is not little. It's not, it's not as giant as many industries, but this totally is not a little thing. They sell a wide variety of products. I'm not going to go into that in great depth, but consumer products, consumer services, even some services and products sold to businesses across many, many product categories. Now, these next two bullets, I sort of always like to have in any such talk, because to me what these connote is the following. We now have a distribution channel. We have an MLM firm, and they're the manufacturer, so to speak. And we have these distributors who are retailers who also consume themselves, and they may sell to other people. And these distributors may, some, decide they want to build a business and recruit other distributors. So if you think, I don't know if any of you have a background in sales, but in sales there are classic sales titles. You can be a sales rep, so you have your own territory you sell. If you're really good, you get promoted to sales manager. You often still have your own personal book of business, but you now manage 8 to 10 field salespeople, and you're going to get bonuses, overrides on their sales volume. So when I say, as an MLM distributor, you may try to now build a business, I'm saying, maybe you start as a personal consumer. Then you think, I could sell this, sell a little bit to people you know. And then some of them are excited, and they say, I'd like to do this too. And then you become a sales manager. So we allow in that one descriptor for these different functions to occur in this channel as we go to market. Meanwhile, however, these distributors get a lot of help from the firm. The firm does a lot of things for you. They give you a business in a kit bag that has a product line, meaning they engage in serious R&D and production cost incursion. Supply chain infrastructure, they figure out how to access, sometimes all the way back to raw materials, the inputs for products, as well as downstream logistics systems to get products out to distributors and end users and take back returns. They set up very complex IT systems in order to run these compensation systems. They put together customer service, distributor training, branding. It's a big corporate venture. The distributor, meanwhile, pays typically a modest registration fee, exerts effort, so they're feet on the street. They do training, they do selling, they may do business building, all right? And I didn't add on here, but it's worthy of saying, they also provide an asset that the firm does not have, which is their personal network, okay? So you have a set of friends and colleagues and people that you know, and you could reach out to them if you were excited about doing this business, and they might become some of your customers. The firm does not know those people. So that's a key asset that they bring too. So that's how direct selling works. And these distributors are the classic independent contractors, okay? Now, I'm not going to go into this deeply, but this is an important thing. There is a set of what we call protections that legitimate multi-level marketing firms by which I mean not pyramid schemes. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Implement. I have a whole list of them later in the slide deck, but I did not think I would have time to go through these. But they are a set of observable rules and behaviors. They're not secret. You can actually, if you are investigating with this firm, you can go and observe. They do this, 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 and this. They don't do that. These activities protect the firm, its distributors, and the business as a whole against things like, I'll say, opportunistic distributors deciding what they'll do is load up on a whole lot of inventory so that they goose up their commission rates or move to a higher level when in fact they have no capability to sell the stuff. Or they encourage the people that they sponsor to load up on inventory. Even better, it's not my inventory, it's your inventory, right? So these protections safeguard against these sorts of things. And in short, they imply together that sales, that consumption, I should say, by distributors themselves is really tantamount to true retail sales, by which I mean the following. So I wrote a case a long time back on Mary Kay. And Mary Kay, as most of you know, sells makeup and cosmetics. And so it is very easy to decide that you'd like to become a Mary Kay distributor and have no intention to build a business at all. Because the enrollment fee is modest, and if you consume a certain amount of makeup per year, all you guys listen up, right? Then it actually is financially better for you to sign up as a distributor and buy at wholesale than it is to continue as a retail consumer and pay retail. So there's a simple break even. You may never build the business. But think about the day before you sign up, the day after you sign up. You haven't changed at all. You were consuming personally before, you're consuming personally now. So those sorts of consumption events are voluntary, the same as they've always been, and they occur at the true end user level. And so these protections, importantly, help us figure out when purchases by distributors are being spurred by some of the nefarious things I talked about before versus by true, voluntary behavior. They're just, I like the product, I consume it myself, right? That's going to become important because there is a certain point of view that suggests that you should exclude, when you're trying to figure out, is this company legitimate? Can it actually support itself through time? Or is it going to collapse under the weight of trying to manage this business? They will say, well, all those people who signed up and they buy personally, you should cut out those sales. Those don't count. Okay? And if you do that, a whole lot more companies will look like they're about to collapse as pyramid schemes than actually will, given the true consumption behavior going on. So that's an important thing in these protections as well, and it's going to be a foundation in my work. Now, so it's a little bit about direct selling. The concerns are just like what I said before. Are people being misled? Are people being urged to buy inventory they will never sell and get stuck in their garage, et cetera? Is there unfortunate behavior going on? So if we want to understand whether this rises to the level truly of harm, okay, I need kind of two definitions, which I'm going to lay out for you that just are the foundation for everything that I set up in my model. The first is this term NER, which is net economic return. I wanted to make up a term that isn't somebody else's term because it encompasses all of these elements of benefit and cost that characterize signing up as a distributor, okay? And so it includes the dollar savings from my personal consumption at wholesale prices and any other, just beneficial utility I get from personal consumption. It includes my retail markups that I make. That's a benefit. And it includes, if I earn any checks from the firm, it includes those checks, okay? And I, as a distributor, incur costs. I have to pay. Typically, some firms have zero registration fees, but often there's an annual registration fee. It might be $100 a year. I will buy products at wholesale, so COGS is cost of goods sold. accounting term for what my inventory acquisition costs are, and then any costs I incur of exerting selling effort or business building. Some people will put on meetings at hotel rooms. They'll use their car mileage to go and visit people, et cetera, right? Those are all costs of doing business. And the benefits minus the costs is your net economic return, okay? That's what it is. So that's just a measure of economic well-being net from doing this, right? Now, there's another element that has to get added in here to get to a definition of what I call harm. Again, I made up my own term because I need it to be different, not just harm, which I think is too vague. I call this avoidable economic loss. This is an economic loss that occurs that could have been avoided if you but only ... Okay? Right? And the ... is where the juice is. So for this to occur, we have to introduce another dimension. It's not just how do we define what are benefits and what are costs. We also have to think about what you believe about it ex ante before you join versus what is true ex post in the real world. Right? So the time dimension is crucial too because of that uncertainty business, okay? So avoidable economic loss occurs if all four of these conditions hold. So let's think just logically what these mean. I'm a prospect. I may sign up to join this direct selling company, right? But I have uncertainty. I don't know all the information that would be useful in calculating my NER. So my ex ante estimate is imperfect, right? There's something missing. That's condition one. Really easy to meet condition one, okay? Condition two, the relevant information is known by the firm itself or by your upline sponsor, who's the person who's supposed to guide you along this process, okay? That's possible, not always true. And thing three, the availability of this information would have changed my ex ante assessment. Some information you don't know, but if you knew it, it wouldn't change anything, okay? And that's not the kind of information I'm talking about. It has to actually move you from having an ex ante estimate that, oh, this looks great, to a realization, I didn't think about this downside, and maybe for me, no is a better answer, okay? So that's thing three. So changing your ex ante NER. And thing four is, you sign up anyway because you lack the information. Whether or not they had it, you don't get it, so you never change your ex ante estimate and you join. And as a result, your ex post take is negative. Right? In other words, it does not, your NER is so low, it doesn't meet what I call W naught, which is what I could have done with my time if I hadn't done this. Right? I could have gone and gotten a job, part-time, full-time, whatever. Okay? So it has to be that ex post, you actually have something bad happen, but that it is due to these things beforehand. And so now, and you see, this is not just an MLM. This is true about, I'm excited to become an Uber driver. I think I'm great at crafts, I'll open an Etsy shop. Boy, can I make money on eBay. I think I'll go teach undergraduates because more and more adjuncts are, right? Okay, this is true of all these things. So you have to have all those things happen together, and that's where the guts of the results lie. And therefore, the caution to policy is going to lie. So just to presage where we're going here, if all of those things are true, right, then you could have harm. But think about the difficulty of all those things holding, right? How much of the time, remember what I said, the firm doesn't know who you are, right? So what is the likelihood that they can resolve my uncertainty about how hot a crafter I am? Zero, right? So they can't resolve this uncertainty, okay? Now, it may be true that I'm a terrible crafter, but I will only discover it by leaping in, right, and trying this and failing, all right? And so is it their fault? They couldn't have known. That's the problem. So the action is going to be in could they have known it? Would this have actually changed my behavior? And I'm going to tell you there are ways that it wouldn't, okay, and so on. And so we're going to winnow out the times when it looks like there are losses and hence harm to ask why. And those whys are going to cause us to carve out various cases and be left with actually very few situations where you can allege true harm in a litigible, what is the word? Litigible is able to be litigated. There's an adjectival form of litigate. Imagine me using it. Okay, so that's really what I'm driving at here. So my idea about loss is to say we have to know why it happened, not just that it apparently happened. And we, at some level, we have to, there's a spirit here of, stand up and take responsibility, okay? You signed a contract. You didn't have to sign that contract. No one forced your hand to sign that contract, right? But you did, and so here you are. So did you choose to do this? And by the way, so you know, in these agreements, which are the contracts, every single one, I've looked at dozens of them, every single one says, right above the signature line, it says, I attest, something like this, I attest with my signature that I have read this entire agreement and everything it refers to. And usually there will be a couple of supporting documents which you are also given, and I attest with my signature. I have read this, and I agree to the terms, and I understand it. Usually all those things are in there, and you sign. So if you didn't do that, you see, you're still legally bound, okay? All right. Now, here we have the distributor. Can you tell me, like, how many more minutes should I go? Like, just 10?
Keep going. You're doing
great.
Okay.
I really tried to cut this down. But, people love nothing so much as that which they themselves have created. So there you go. I winnowed down this model to, remember my focus. I want to know when you might have truly been harmed, okay? Now, there's this principle in scientific theorizing called Occam's razor, which maybe some of you know. The idea being, I'm bastardizing it, but you get down to the skinniest, sharpest model, which is the most likely to reject your contention, okay? And if in that world you fail to reject your contention, then by broadening this to the bigger set, you gave it the toughest, right? So if you then go to the bigger set, we're done, right? Okay, so in that spirit, I am here focusing only on a certain kind of distributor, and that is the kind who is most likely to be harmed, all right? This is the person who is a newbie, typically, not highly adept, not lots of years in this process. I'm going to model a one-year horizon. So they've just joined. They have 1 year. What is that first year? If I can show there are limited situations where they're truly harmed in that world, what are the chances when you are more knowledgeable? You already know. You've re-upped 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, right? If you don't know now, when are you going to learn? And I'm going to make these people not the really successful business builders who make override commissions like sales managers do on their downlines. I'm just going to say you can consume at wholesale, goody, and you can do some retail selling, and maybe no retail selling. And I'm going to constrain you to that, okay? I will, again, as I said before, let people be of one of 2 types to keep the analysis simple, but you can do this as a continuum. The analysis will still hold. So you could be either a high or a low, but you don't always know which one you are beforehand. You just don't know, okay? You know other elements of the business. I'm going to let you do your due diligence and read about the company, look at the policies and procedures, look at the products, talk to your upline, right? You're going to do your work. You're not just going to sign on the bottom line. And you will have certain things you get to choose. These are the 2 most common things. There are other things too, but I'm, again, paring it down. You get to choose your markup to retail. There may be a suggested price, but you really choose. You pay W, your wholesale price. You get to choose how much higher you're going to price. knowing, put on my economist hat, demand curve, slope down, slope down. So if you want to sell more, you're going to have to drop your price, right? So you pick your price, and you pick how hard you want to work at the business, okay? And that's it's as skinny as I can get to analyze the person who is at most risk. Meanwhile, the firm, I'm going to say, you remember that list of protections I referred to, and I said these are observable. So we can tell a priori if we're concerned about a company. Now I'll put on policy hat. If we're concerned about a company, we can go check those conditions, all right? And stop the whole process right there. So I'm going to say, let this firm get through that, that screen. They have the protections in place, all right? And here's things they know and they don't know. They know in the aggregate how many lows and highs there are, and the reason is they have sales data. They have these gigantic sales databases, and they can figure out how many people, never sell more than whatever is their threshold number, $1,000 of product a year. How many people sell lots and lots and lots more than that, right? So they can figure out how many lows and highs there are. And I will tell you on a real gross average basis, if you were going to just set up two pools, the highs being the really hot performers, we're talking less than 10% of your population. This is not a big group, okay? Just think about you and everybody you know. How many people you know are natural, adept, fabulous, show people and sellers? It's hard. It's really hard. You have to put on your shell and go out and be energetic and convince people, teach them that what you have is good and here's why, and learn about their problems and say, some of this stuff won't help with your problems, but this will. There's a whole element of selling here that requires being empathetic as well as energetic and articulate and high energy and so on. It's exhausting, Okay, so they don't know, they may know that they have 90% lows or 80, whatever is their proportion, but they don't know what any individual new person is because those people have not revealed themselves yet, okay? Now, what does the firm do? They can set an annual registration fee just to be a distributor, for us to run a website for you and, process your payments and so on, you pay a registration fee. It could be $60, it could be $100, something like that. And we're going to have a commission rate on sales, okay? Now, most people would say, well, you're going to set the wholesale prices, right? And I will say, yes. Now, I'll tell you analytically, that's a mathematical degree of freedom I don't need. Because by messing with the commission rate, so I can take a commission rate and make it look exactly like any combination of wholesale price and a different commission rate. So I could say, yeah, you set a wholesale price, but that doesn't really add to the analysis because you can do this with one instrument, not two. So I'm making my model simpler there. And the firm, no surprise, is going to have the goal of maximizing profit, okay? Now, I looked at a whole lot of scenarios here. So let me just describe briefly what the scenarios are because I wanted to look at all the different ways people participate. And then given how I participate, could I have been harmed, right? Okay, so one of the ways I could participate is I'm what we call the intentional personal consumer. That's all I do. I'm the Mary Kay makeup lover who is phobic about selling to people, okay? All I want to do is buy the product at wholesale. That's it. So that's the intentional personal consumer. They have no aspirations towards selling or business building, okay? That's one thing you could be. And for this, it's irrelevant whether they know their own type. So I've said it's as if they do know who they are because they're never going to try to sell, so it's irrelevant if they're high or low, okay? Then there are people who are selling aspirants. They also like the product, but they're thinking, I'd like to try retail selling, okay? And so it's possible as a selling aspirant that you either do know your own type or you don't. There are certain people who actually do, as I've discovered. These are people who have typically done this before. They kind of know that they know how to sell, or they have done selling in other industries. Some people come and they have been pharmaceutical sales reps, or they have done some other kind of not literally direct selling, but personal selling where it's all on their head and they know they're good, okay? So you may know, you may not know. And then I have this fourth one. I didn't have this for a long time, but there's this thing I call the Lake Wobegon effect. So, Garrison Keillor has fallen from grace, but he's still a fabulous writer and storyteller, and he used to host Prairie Home Companion for many decades on public radio. And he always had a monologue, what was the first words in it? But anyway, it was about a fictional town in Minnesota where he was from called Lake Wobegon. And he would give you the news from Lake Wobegon every week. It would be this fictitious story that he spun brilliantly as he was talking. And he always started by saying, all the men are strong, all the women are good looking, and all the children are above average. Okay? All right. So the Lake Wobegon effect I'm talking about is everybody believes they're above average. Right? This is actually a very common human psychological characteristic, sort of a positivity bias. I've even seen it documented back with World War II British Royal Air Force pilots, who for a while were getting shot down at an unbelievable rate. Like 75% of them were dying. Yet if you asked someone what they thought their personal probability of surviving would be, surviving, not being shot down, they would virtually flip it because they thought, yeah, but those are losers. Me? I'm special. Okay. All right, so my last scenario is all distributors believe they're high types, regardless. They don't know, but they believe they're high because aren't I special? And that, despite the fact that the firm reveals that 90% of people are lows, which I talk about that as the parameter mu, but anyway, it's the proportion of lows. But they'll say, well, that's fine for those 90%. But then there's me, right? Okay. All right, so all of those things could be true about these participants. And then the question is, how do we deal with them as the firm? And I model that by thinking about the contract that is offered. So I, as a firm, I know there are highs and lows. Just briefly, I can put together a contract, a commission rate, and a registration fee that will be uniquely attractive only to real high types. It's going to be a higher registration fee, because you, after all, are very good. And I'm going to give you a really high commission rate because you are super good at selling, folks. Okay, so I want to goose your sales effort. And I'm going to charge you a registration fee that is meritorious given how much you are going to be able to produce and make. Okay, so that is a high type kind of contract that if you knew you were a low, you would think, not a hope. I mean, this is stupid. Why would I do this? I can't possibly do that, right? Okay, so that is what we would call in economics a separating contract. It is a contract which, if everybody knows who they are, it separates lows from highs. Lows decide, not for me, they don't join. Highs say, perfect, let me at it. Okay? You could also put together a contract that would be suitable and attractive enough for everybody to want to join. And it's got to be a little kinder and gentler. And that is called a pooling contract. It pools together highs and lows so that even lows think, good for me too, okay? And so I look at all these different forms of contracts that could attract only the very best, could attract everyone. I also look in some of these cases at contracts where you attract everyone, except lows end up making sort of a negative return. It may not be due to your fault. It may be due to simply the bearing of entrepreneurial risk, but I've also calculated what I call fully insuring contracts, which are ways for a firm, for example, with this distributor who tries to sell, doesn't know their own type. They discover after the fact that they're lows, but they exerted all this effort and they tried to price high because they thought they were so good, and then they sell nothing but nothing. This is me with my loving hands at home craft projects, right, on Etsy. And so those people, ex post, have this feeling that they've been had, when in fact it's an entrepreneurial risk thing, not that. However, I say, what if the firm fully insured set up a contract, which I've calculated, that allows everybody to walk away with at least I'll call break even, right, or an okay contract. What would that look like? Would it be good for the firm? Would it be good for the high types? Would it be good for the low types? Would we solve the problem? Okay? All right, so those are all the types of things that I've done. And thankfully for you, I'm not going to go through all the models. However, at the last slide, I'm going to click for you, and I'll just, is there a board? I bet I could write on that class what the SSRN paper stuff is. If you're interested, there are links to the paper and the math. If you want to read all my math, you can read that too. But I've analyzed all these cases to find out whether all 4 of those conditions that produce an avoidable economic loss occur, okay? Do they occur? And everywhere where it didn't, I put the results in green. There's only one situation where it's possible that there is an avoidable economic loss, okay? And that is not true all the time, right? So I'm not going to focus on all these other things. They all hinge on issues like, yeah, you turned out to be a low and you thought you were high before, or you thought you were average but you're really low. That's part of the entrepreneurial risk. That's the spirit of these other results. Here, if you're in the Lake Wobegon world, everybody thinks they're highs, right? Everybody. But really, a lot of people are lows. And the lows join. Now, if the firm sets up a contract that is appropriate for highs, think about why it would do that. Everybody believes they're a high. They all believe this. And so if you set up a contract for highs, they'll think, great, exactly for me. I'm going to sign up, right? Because I'm special too. Now, those people, you see, if they truly are highs, they're going to come out fine. There will be no loss. If they're truly lows, they're going to eat it big time, possibly, okay? Because they thought they were highs. The firm built a contract around them believing they are highs, even though it understands some people are lows in the aggregate, factors that in, but still. And these people end up with negative returns that are because they misapprehended. I'm using that term very carefully. They did not apprehend. They did not see in their minds that they were truly a low, okay? And they thought they were a high, but they're not. They're a low. And really, the reason I have question marks even here is this. The issue is, fine, you didn't realize you were a low. But was that only because you misapprehended your type? I'm not really great. I'm not great. Or was it also because of misrepresentation? There's misapprehension. There's also misrepresentation. Really, really important to distinguish between these things. So misrepresentation means somebody somewhere, remember, knew the information, but they either suppressed it, right? I grew up Catholic. You learn a lot about sin as Catholic. And one of the things you learn is that there are sins of omission and sins of commission. So here, there could be important information. Really, 90% of our people are lows, but we're just kind of not going to tell you that, okay? And so if you didn't know, you might just think, well, 50-50. I don't know. No, it's really 90-10. That would be an omission, a failure to convey the information. That is, you suppress the information. Or you might actually represent something about the information that is misleading or, in fact, completely incorrect. Okay, you might shade the truth or literally tell lies. So there's sins of omission, sins of commission. And if those are done purposefully, that is, the firm knew that there was a truth that was important for people to evaluate what this really was as an opportunity. But they either didn't tell you or they falsified it, okay? And had they, remember the third condition, and had they told me, I would have revised my behavior, right? I wouldn't have joined. That's the other linchpin that causes me to put the question marks. Because in this situation, what did I say? Their premise is we're all special. That is the premise. We are special. And so think about this. If you think you're special, and the firm comes and tells you, most people aren't special. And this is what happens to not special people. And you understand that some people have lots of sales experience and other people have little, and some people are naturals and some are not. And they go on and on and on. They can tell you about the income statistics. They can disclose at the aggregate everything they can possibly tell you. Now, are you going to listen? Do we listen? Okay, so as an academic, it's a recurring problem, right? In the MBA and other classrooms, where you teach people things. This is what we do. We convey knowledge, all right? Knowledge about things like when the next assignment is due. I mean, it could be that pedantic, right? But the fact is, I can say it and write it in the syllabus and put it online and send an email. I can use 4 different methods of communication. I guarantee you, there will be people who don't take in the information, okay? And they'll say, well, I didn't see that. That wasn't out there. Well, they'll actually tell you it wasn't there, okay? When it was completely there. All right, so I take refuge in the following statement, which I think has a legal analog. My statement as a professor is, I can teach, only you can learn, okay? Now, so in this venue, this is the taking responsibility part in a sense, if you want to get personal responsibility about this. If the firm does what it can do, which after all is limited, it knows in the aggregate, it doesn't know in the individual, right? If it does what it can do to convey all the relevant information it can, and if it polices all of its recruiting upline folks to make sure that they don't lie, there will always be some slippage, right? But you police it, you make best efforts. If you do all that stuff, and people just don't pay attention. So I call those people non-remedial. I have to have some word. I mean, we think about remediating people, someone who doesn't get it and whatever. You can remediate them. You can teach them. There's some people you will never teach. Okay, and so in this world, there can be an AEL in the proportion of lows, right, who would have been remedial if they could have known the information. You know what I'm saying? But even if you were completely sin of omission, not saying anything where you should have said something, there will still be people who would never have changed their behavior even if you had told them. They are non-remedial. And so in a perfect world, in a policy perfect world, even in a non-perfect world, you should make this effort. Don't assume that everybody in this case who makes less than the opportunity cost of their time had an AEL. Some of them would have never paid attention. Now, I can tell you from the data I have from students which ones will never pay attention. I have my little indicators. I'm not sure we have those indicators in all the policy realms where you would look to see, did the Uber driver get harmed? Is the adjunct professor shafted, et cetera. But that's what I'm driving at. So conceptually, even in that red subset, there's still a partitioning, right? So I come away from this thinking, okay, there's a whole lot of situations where, yes, you are taking entrepreneurial risk. That's not the same thing as having had harm caused to you, which would not have occurred but for ... right? Okay, what does all this say for policy? So now let me say something that's not quite on this slide. There are lots of actions, and this is all written up in my paper, often by the FTC, but sometimes by state attorneys general, et cetera, against illegal pyramid schemes. There are illegal pyramid schemes. There were. They get shut down, okay? So it's not that everybody is lily white. However, often the arguments that are forwarded from a legal and policy perspective sort of have this intertwining of 2 prongs that I think should be separated. Prong 1 is you're operating a pyramid scheme, and there's a specific definition of a pyramid scheme. It has to do with the nature of the compensation plan. I'm not going to go into the details. It's in the Coscott case. I've quoted in my paper. But it has to do with a specific element of the compensation plan where payment is made for mere recruitment of other people, headhunting fees, without regard to actually making sales. This creates a Ponzi scheme, right? There isn't any there. Okay, so that's one thing they go after. They say you're operating a pyramid scheme, and they also talk about you're committing fraud. You are sin of omission of all these types. I think we really need to separate these things, right? You do have to look to see that the protections are in place because those are indicators that tell you there's a vanishingly small probability this firm is operating a pyramid scheme. What pyramid scheme company would invest in R&D, would tell people all the time that they shouldn't inventory? This would just not be in your interest if what you're doing is you're running a scam. You'd be, right? You wouldn't do that. So if you see the protections are in place, and the firm is financially viable, it's not running, a shell game, right? Then the action truly is in this business of misrepresentation. The action is in fraud, not in, is it a pyramid scheme? Now, here's my counterfactual to tell you how that could be true. I've never seen a real example, but just to show you logically why this is the truth. Let's suppose I put together a scheme. It is truly a Ponzi scheme. It is literally, there is nothing there. It's a chain letter, okay? And I tell everybody all about it. So I have all of the moral equivalence of the protections in place. I tell you exactly how much you'll make if you recruit 3 more people, and they recruit 3 more people, and they recruit 3 more people, ad infinitum. I will tell you there is no there. I will tell you I'm selling gold coins for $600 that are actually worth 25 bucks a piece. That's a real case, once upon a time. I will tell you everything. I will not misrepresent, okay? But it's absolutely a pyramid scheme. Do we have a problem here? Do we have, I would say we really don't have a problem here because I've just told you the 10,001 reasons why it's totally idiotic to join this scheme, correct? So these things rise and fall on misrepresentation. And therefore, I think the action really needs to be on looking at what I call the governance of this distribution channel, how we communicate, finding metrics and norms for what is an acceptable rate of imperfect communication. And there are norms for this in other literatures. So that we don't commingle an argument about something being a pyramid scheme when really the action is on the fraud side and vice versa, okay? There are particular compensation plan structures that define a pyramid scheme. But I'm saying if you have any one of the number of standard comp structures in place, looking at the comp structure and saying pyramid scheme is actually an incorrect piece of analysis. Observing that a very small proportion of people make a vast proportion of the bonus payouts is also irrelevant alone to assessing a pyramid scheme. A pyramid scheme may have this pattern, but the logical converse is not true, okay? People or firms that have lots of personal consumption, also not a problem. This has been deemed a problem in certain cases, and I disagree with that. From a business and economic perspective, people join because they like the products, not a problem. Distributors who make no bonus checks from the firm, also irrelevant, because there are all these people who personally consume and love it, they never get a check. They're thrilled. They sign up again year after year after year. I've seen it in the databases. We can prove this, okay? Finally, telling me you didn't know beforehand what a bad seller you would be, irrelevant. I'm sorry for you, sort of, but you took a calculated risk, which actually didn't cost you that much money, right? So grow up, take responsibility, put on your big girl panties, and do it, okay? All right, so here, let's see, we don't have an internet connection, do we? On this, is this internet connected? Well, I have clickable links here, but I will, well, you have the info. Harold, is there a way you can publicize to people?
We can put that up on the website.
Okay.
We'll get that up on the website at
So-
the Center for the Economics of the Internet. We'll post your paper and a link to it.
Perfect. And there's the technical appendix. Do not forget that gripping read,
Of
Harold.
course we'll have that up.
21 pages of math. Okay, so that's kind of my closing statement, and I'll stop with that. But really, the thesis statement is this: I think we can do a better job as analysts of discovering when there really truly is harm. I think a lot of lawsuits and actions are filed on the basis of some people complaining, I have been harmed. I have no doubt that they've suffered a financial hardship. I'm not arguing they have not. But to immediately jump to, this is a pyramid scheme, this is fraud, et cetera, I think is a big jump, and what I'm trying to offer here are some definitions and some ways to disentangle the fundamental sources so that we can have a better basis for arguing when there really is harm, because I believe there really can be harm, but you shouldn't call it when you don't really see it. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I think that is the best paper we've had presented here. That is really extraordinary. I'm going to ask the first question, then we'll open it up. Just quickly, if I can translate this into Section 5 of the Federal Fair Trade Act of the Federal Trade Commission. Am I interpreting what you're saying? There are two causes of action there. There's what's called deceptive trade practices, which I think is your misrepresentation would be deceptive trade, and then there's something nebulously called unfair trade practices. And you're saying focus on the deceptive trade practice, and or am I misinterpreting you?
Well, see, I think that there can be unfair trade practices that give rise to the potential for outcomes that individuals like us, we'd never be able to see. You know what I mean? So,
but wouldn't that be deceptive? I'm trying to figure out,
no,
is there any...
I understand exactly what you're saying. I guess we'd have to go instance by instance, because what I've tried to do here, since the cases are all filed on the basis of harm to individuals, I've taken the point of view of the individual. Now, these can come from actions or inactions on the part of the firm to tell you what really the business is like. And part of what you're saying, I think, with the deceptive trade practices and all this is maybe there are things inside the guts of the way the business works that make it more prone to taking advantage of people in a way that causes them to behave in a fashion they wouldn't behave otherwise if they only knew. But in my mind, the question is, does that devolve at the individual level to a question of information had I but known, right?
Yeah.
Even though we may look at it differently from the industry and firm perspective than we would from the ground up perspective.
Let me open it up to questions from the floor.
Can I ask you a question? How many of you either are, have been in, or have a close friend or family member in a gig economy activity? You know what I'm saying, right? You know somebody who's an adjunct professor, right? I'm surprised the proportion is so low. No one has good statistics because this is all informal in some sense. So I saw one study which looked moderately more believable than others that said that something like 1/3 of adults do a gig economy thing. I'm in the gig economy because I do consulting. I have a full-time job as a professor. I also have a job as a consultant, right? Your accountant is a gigger. If you have a guy who's an accountant and does your taxes, and he's not employed by a firm, so some people say their accountant, right? He's gigging because he's his own entrepreneurial thing, right? Now, that he doesn't have a platform necessarily. Now, some of them sort of do have a platform to let them do that. Financial advisor, some of them use Schwab as their platform, but they're individual financial advisors, and they're out running their own shingle in their own entrepreneurial way. There's a lot of gigging going on out there.
But a self-entrepreneur, you'd say, would be in a gig economy?
In the senses I'm talking about, not every entrepreneur, but when your next piece of revenue is gotten because you went and got each one, right? You have to go get every client you have. You have to go get every customer for every craft product you want to sell. You have to, right? So that is doing a gig. You have to get out there and pull the Uber ride. And so I think there's a lot of this actually going on. These people who are not covered by salary contracts, they have no IRA co-contributions or anything like that. They're out there getting every thing as it comes. So anyway, so I'm always kind of interested to ask people what their perception is on that. Yep. Like we have a guy that does painting. When we have to have something painted in our house, he's someone we know. He's in our town. He runs his own little business. I have never seen him do any advertising. I don't think he would know how. And he does everything through word of mouth, and every gig is a gig.
In that case, I do know somebody.
Yeah.
Who does his own painting and gets paid.
Yep.
Probably doesn't declare all the money he gets either.
That's another issue, obviously, yes. Or some plumbers are individual. I mean, we have these people, I'm sure you guys do too, who are, for example, plumbers, electrical guys, they're every possible trade. And they may work for a firm, just like I work for Northwestern University, but they gig on the side too. Right? So. Or my mother-in-law is 92, just had her birthday, fabulous. And she has caretakers through a company called, it's one of these, care at home, home at care, you know, these words. And she has one person she likes very much who said, Margaret, how about if I just come and we'll do our own deal? That's a gig, right? So it's out there all the time.
Question here.
Where does Craigslist or Angie's List fall in all this?
Yeah, so I'll say I think it is a platform the same way that Etsy is a platform or eBay is a platform or Amazon is a platform. Here's what I don't know, because I have not looked deeply into them. Let's take Angie's List. So, you know, home repair people, or let's just stick with home repair, or upholstery repair or whatever, right? If you run your own little business by yourself, or you work for somebody else, you could still list your talents on Angie's List and get people who would hire you because they saw you on Angie's List and you got however many good reviews. So if that revenue to you, that income to you does not come because you work for an upholstery company, but you did it on your own entrepreneurially, and see, here's the commonality when you bring these up. Commonality is you alone would have a very hard time building a presence and a brand. But when you have Angie's List, you are instantly reaching bajillion people. And you can reach them in a targeted way because you can say, I live in this zip code. And so someone, you know, who lives in rural Virginia may not look for you because you're in the middle of Washington, D.C. It's a little too far, right? So you can target. And therefore, the platform, just like I gave the list of things that a direct selling firm does, the platform does things for you. They create the marketing environment and the targeted customer list that you can access that you yourself would never be able to otherwise get, right? So in that sense, absolutely, that's an example of gigging. So I'm a little cautious because I don't know whether larger, say, plumbing firms might list themselves on Angie's List too. I just don't know. And then in that situation, I would say that Angie's List is another promotional outlet, but they're not running that firm as a gig.
Gentleman over here. And please identify yourself for the audience.
Yes, the title is Consumer Harm from Voluntary Business Arrangements, but we also hear in the public debate competitors being harmed by the voluntary business arrangements. The most obvious is, say, jurisdictions restricting or forcing, say, Uber to be classified not as a gig operator, but as an employer. How does that come into? Is this really a lobbying pressure, or is there any economic justification? The way you presented it, there's no doubt that they are not. But how does the economic science come into this?
So I think there's sort of maybe two things actually in your question. The example you brought up with Uber in, I guess is it in all of California or only in some jurisdictions? San Francisco? All of California. That they're saying Uber drivers will now be employees and they will, with all humongous costs, right? And not all the drivers even want it. Now, in that situation, I'm sure there can be some competitive implications, and I'll lay out a couple in a minute, but the actual action is pretty directly on the gig platform. Here's where I thought you were going. Maybe this is all part and parcel of the same thing. So let me embroider on your comment, because this is much more competitive. Let's use Uber, just like we're doing, and imagine how difficult it is now to find a taxi cab. Actually, this is one of the reasons I have to tell you, I love coming to Washington. Isn't that crazy? I love coming to Washington because this is like cab heaven. It's awesome. I go out on the curb at DCA, Reagan Airport, and there are lines of cabs. They're too deep. It's amazing. And they're waiting to take your ride, and you're thrilled to take their ride because they've put regulations in place that leave me reasonably sure that I'm not going to get gouged, because there's this whole area, I forget what you call it, but your little regions, you go from this region, that region, and so on. Whereas in Chicago, I got to tell you, well, Chicago, its own special place. There's a question about when and where the taxi driver can charge you meter and a half. And I won't go into all the details. So anyway, here, cabs are fantastic. In California, cabs suck, okay? They're terrible. It's hard to find them. They will drive you around, supercharge you, et cetera. Okay. And so therefore, the rise of an Uber causes people, particularly the tech-aware and happy youngsters and so on, to flee to Uber. And then the competitive harm happens to the cabs, you see. The value of a medallion drops to de minimis amounts. And so, in some sense, some people might argue, I have not read this, but you might argue that this is a restoration of competitive balance. Because after all, Uber had a competitive advantage that one might argue from certain circles is unfair. And they'll say, well, we're not running a cab service, we're running a platform. This is always the backstop. All we run is the platform. And we're letting people share their car with someone else and give them a ride. That's what they'll say. So if is that the competitive angle you're talking about? Yeah. In a way, So I would say there's a really interesting dynamic and development that, well, we'll see. History will tell, okay? The future will tell. I think Uber, unfettered, can create holes in certain markets. In other words, there are markets and services that will not be provided because Uber drivers are not required to actually serve you, okay? So we go out to California a lot. We have a place there that is not in San Francisco, but San Francisco is the airport you go to. And we have actually had an Uber driver in San Francisco airport. They're the one, they're picking us up. They come, they pick us up. They say, now tell me where you're going to again. And we tell them, and the guy says, well, I don't want to go there. And he literally drives away, just drives away. A cab would not be allowed to do that. So that creates consumer problems, right? Because this competitor that can come in and underprice cabs also can underserve. So is that good for consumer welfare, industry welfare, societal coverage, et cetera? I think there are lots of really important issues like that. Should we let these things start up? Absolutely, for sure, because obviously consumers love them. But they're the consumers who live in downtown, fill in the city, not in the burbs.
I promised our audience we'd be done by
okay.
1:30.
Okay.
I can see there are more questions. Please come up and ask your questions to Professor Coughlan, but please join me in thanking you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Well, good.
Wonderful.